on 980 CKNW.
7:37, good morning. The effect of tariffs on this country, the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration in the United States, to a lot of people seem kind of distant, and it doesn't really affect them. I mean, yes, steel and aluminum, eventually it might cause some things to go up in price, but most people, I think, are kind of, well, what does it really mean? How does it affect me? Well, you're going to find out, because the effects of Trump's trade war has prompted Loblaws, the country's biggest grocery chain, to warn of grocery price increases, saying the company has no choice. Those on a fixed budget will be hit the hardest, of course. Your dollar won't go as far. So how bad will it get? Joining us to sort some of this out is assistant professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, Ian Lee. And, Professor, I appreciate you taking out the time. What does this mean exactly? I mean, a lot of grocery prices we know about, we understand. Why are they going up? Because of tariffs.
Right. Just a quick minor correction. I'm an associate professor, and I know that probably doesn't matter to most people, but in the university world, it matters.
All right.
And I've certainly been teaching this international business strategy and the impact of trade agreements and the tariffs on companies and the economy of the country. In terms of the tariffs and trade wars, this has been studied to death literally since the Depression, which was in the 1930s, because we got into a huge trade war back then. Multiple countries did, where they were hitting each other with successive rounds of tariffs. And while it didn't cause the Depression, that's why they agreed, there's also wide consensus that it made the Depression much worse than it needed to be or would have been without it. And that's because tariffs are taxes on the consumer, and it takes more money out of their pocket. So it's the opposite of stimulus. It slows down the economy because you have less money to spend, because each product is costing more that are being hit with the tariffs. And so there is a universal consensus that trade wars and tariff wars are a very bad thing for everybody. There are no exceptions, and there's no, some people say don't understand, Donald Trump is a horrible, disgusting, obnoxious man. It doesn't matter. It's very negative for everybody, including ordinary people, because, and I'll explain very quickly to answer your question, when goods are imported into Canada, and we import 1/3 of the totality of our economy, because we're a small economy. Some Canadians think because we're a very large country geographically, we're very large economically, and we're not. We're 1/10 the size of the U.S. We're smaller than the state of California, the entire Canadian economy. And so we're not completely self-reliant. That is to say, we can't make everything in-house. So that's why nations trade, because you can't make everything that the economy needs. And so we become interdependent, as do other countries. So goods are imported, and at the border, they have to be declared, whether they come in by truck or rail or ship or by airplane. Doesn't matter. They have to fill out customs declarations. And if those goods on that shipment are subject to the tariff, Borders Canada assesses it on the importer, the Canadian importer. That Canadian importer passes it on, typically, to the retailer called Walmart Canada or called Canadian Tire or whatever retailer, and they in turn pass it on to you and I. This includes Loblaws and goods that are subject of finished goods such as, ketchup and that sort of thing, canned food and bottled food and so forth. So if the price goes up by 10 or 20 or 30% on each and every one of these products subject to tariff, then that's taking money out of our pockets that we were not paying before, so we have less money to spend on other things, and it slows down the economy. It's like a tax increase because it is a tax increase. So the key point, John, is contrary to all those people who are pounding their chest and saying, let's stand up to that Donald Trump and stick him in the eye, Donald Trump is not paying these tariffs. Neither are the American consumers or the American producers. They are paid by Canadians at the Loblaws, at the Canadian Tire, at the Walmart Canada. We are sticking it to ourselves because we're angry with Donald Trump. And that, to me, is not very smart. In fact, it's out of all the things we could be doing, this is the worst possible strategy or solution of all, period.
So should Canada instead, when he announced tariffs on steel and aluminum, what should Canada have done? Just kind of take it and smile?
No, I mean, that's always put forward as the alternative, saying, well, you're just saying then give up, lie down on railroad tracks. But nobody has ever suggested that that's the alternative. The alternative is to get back to the negotiating table and to put some water in our wine, which we have not done until now. Since the beginning of the talks, the government has said, and I've been very critical publicly, they have said, instead of saying we are there to get the best possible deal of access to the American economy for all 37 million Canadians, they have repeatedly said the following: we are determined to protect those 6 or 7 industries at the NAFTA talks. In other words, we're not going there to negotiate, which is what negotiations are about. And I'm very familiar with this, labor management negotiations, where one side says, I want you to give this up, and then the other side says, okay, well, then I want you to give something else up to us in exchange for that, and it's called compromise and negotiations. We went in and said, no, no, no. No, we will not open up telecom. No, we will not open up supply management and dairy. No, we will not open up airlines. No, we will not open up banks. Well, as I said, that's not negotiations. And so, consequently, the Americans have retaliated against us, and then we've retaliated against them. The other point I want to make, John, is that they are the largest economy on the planet Earth, over $20 trillion. And the idea that we're going to this a shootout with a pea shooter against a country that has tanks and F-18 fighter jets and nuclear warheads, and I don't mean that literally, that they're going to go to war with us in a military sense, but they've got vastly greater weapons, vastly more power. And so the idea that we're going to win in a shootout is just, it's a hysterical madness.
But how does Canada looking, because until Trump came along, tariffs were levied by certain countries in certain places, but he's taken on tariffs as part of his economic program. Now, you said off the top that none of this makes any sense going back to the 1930s. So why would Canada play along with a situation that the world has proven in the last 100 years is disastrous? Why would we get involved in that?
Two answers. The first reason why should we go back to the negotiating table and negotiate is because it's in our strategic self-interest not to hurt ourselves and engage in acts of self-harming, as we're doing now with the tariff wars. These are acts of national self-harming. That's the one answer. The second answer is, and there's columns increasingly coming out in the Wall Street Journal and the National Post and elsewhere arguing this, and I'm increasingly sympathetic to this interpretation, is Trump is using the tariffs, not because he believes in tariffs, but he's using it as a very blunt battering ram, yes, to hit the other countries, to try to force them, motivate them, and whatever word you want, into agreeing to a new world order. He has a grand vision. He believes that trade has been asymmetrical, which is a big fancy word for saying the other side charges more tariffs than the American side. So the Europeans have always charged higher tariffs on American goods than the Americans charge on European goods. He wants to level the playing field. He's even talked about a zero-tariff world without any tariffs. So his vision, if one accepts this interpretation, and I understand there's listeners who say, I don't believe that. Okay, fine. But there is an increasing number of people in the capital markets and in studying this who are saying his long plan is, his game plan, his geostrategic game plan is to reorder and stop China from cheating, and China has been consistently cheating for 20 years. This has been massively documented, and he is engaging the EU as his ally, as was revealed yesterday when he and Juncker, who is the president of the European Commission, agreed they're going to start negotiating a massive trade agreement which will cover $2 trillion in traded goods, which is half of the traded goods in the world, to create a common level playing field that is essentially going to isolate China. And so Canada is just a small bit player on this. He's not doing this to say, I want to go get Canada. He's doing this because of this larger vision to reorder the world trade system. And that's where he's trying to go, and he's using it. Yes, he's using it with great big baseball clubs, and he's using it to club people who don't go along with him.
Do you agree with Donald Trump and some of his administration when they say, number one, that Canada is cheating and that the United States has been getting the raw end of the deal now for years and years? And number two, that Canada is somehow a national security threat, which came up again yesterday,
right.
In terms of aluminum and steel. How does that get people back to a bargaining table when you have this rhetoric?
So I'm going to answer yes and no. Of course, Canada is not a national security threat. I've actually written papers showing how we've shared, and we have actual treaties and statutes on the books of the two countries that involve defense sharing in the First World War and the Second World War and the Korean War and the Cold War and so on. And of course, we have my late father was a military man, a pilot who actually trained on bases in the United States. We share information through NORAD and NATO and so forth. So the idea that we're a security threat is absolute nonsense. But to your question about the cheating, this isn't, quote, an opinion. I mean, this has been the USTR, the United States Trade Rep, which is an agency, a bureaucratic agency in Washington, just like we have tons of departments and agencies in Ottawa, have been tabling an annual report every year going back to the late George Bush years. And I'm talking George H. Bush, not George W. Bush. So that's the late 80s, early 90s. And they have shown all the countries of the world that U.S. trades with, listing all of the trade irritants where they are doing things that the Americans consider cheating. And they have it for each country. And there's a chapter there on Canada. And it lists the areas where the U.S. believes we have been cheating. And this goes back to as I said, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and so forth. And these are not secret. The Americans have known for years about supply management and have been complaining bitterly, as well as the fact we will not allow an American cell phone company to come into Canada like Verizon, which is why we have some of the highest cell phone rates in the world.
All right, listen, Associate Professor Lee, I appreciate your time and your insight on this. A lot of info, and we appreciate it. We'll have you back on and continue this discussion. But in the meantime, thank you so much for this. Ian Lee is an associate professor of the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University.